Give it on. This evening is about the Bard of the Liberties. Zosimus is here. Zosimus was a bard. A bard, that's an old word for a poet. We don't use that word anymore. In fact, poets don't like that word. Especially when you're in a premises where there's alcohol available. We don't like to be associated with the word bard. Now, first of all, of course, Vincent Kelly, for the use of the gallery, for these rooms, which I've often passed like yourselves, and never knowing what was inside. And to me, this is an Aladdin's cave, hidden away here in the heart of the Liberties. And Vincent, not alone has he given us the use of the room, but he's provided the wine tonight. He's helped to advertise tonight on his own website. And he's even got a loan of this lovely table for me to sign the books at, and I've taken quite a liking to it. I don't think I'd miss it if I brought it home. Also, a few other people, called Brush Shields, for agreeing to do the launch. Brush, in common with Zosimus, is a man of the people, and people, a common man and woman in the street, they respond to him because of that, and because despite his fame, which is considerable, it hasn't changed him. He's still the same Brush Shields, and that's why people love him so much. Eric Byrne, I see here, I used one of Eric's photographs at the back of the book, Eric.
You make me famous.
And thank you for that. Michael O'Flanagan, as usual, Past Publishing, and he's always there for me. I've had to lean on him a bit more than usual during this launch because I have family difficulties at home, and Michael's been there for me. There can be little doubt that if Michael J. Moran had remained Michael J. Moran, we might not have heard of him today. For even among his own balladeers, there were other more accomplished songwriters. James Carney is one. He wrote Dandy Orm's Wedding and Dandy Orm's Ball, both of which are in the book here. The subject of Moran is bigger than the sum of its parts. Here was an uneducated blind beggar who wrote little, and of the little with which he is accredited was actually responsible for a lot less. And yet his pseudonym survives, along with the legend of the character he created and a few of his songs. I don't think you can easily discount the importance of the word Zosimus in all of this. But how did he acquire this strange name? Well, I don't know if you're well up on the history of the saints. I had to do a bit doing the churches of St. Nicholas. Most of the history of saints are steeped in mythology and daft stories. And the story of St. Mary of Egypt is an example. It concerns a holy abbot of Palestine whose name was Zosimus. And he was wandering about the desert, as you do if you're a holy abbot. And after about 20 days in the sun, 20 days, he saw a naked woman, naked but covered in body hair and burnt black from exposure to the sun. This naked, hairy, black creature suddenly appeared in front of him and must have given him quite a shock. Armed with the sign of the cross, he approached her. Eventually he managed to convince her, she managed to convince him that she was not in the employ of Satan. This was Mary, a penitent pilgrim. And some people have referred to her as a prostitute, but in fact she was a whole lot worse than that. Prostitutes do what they do out of need, whereas this woman did it because she enjoyed doing it. After years on the go, she had remorse and went into the desert to repent. Zosimus agreed to convert her to Christianity, and then off he went. Sometime after this, he returned to the desert and found her corpse. There was a message somehow impressed on her forehead, telling him that she was to be buried where he found her. Zosimus was too old by this time to dig the hole. But as luck would have it, a friendly lion was strolling by at the time. Now, what a lion was doing in the desert, you're not supposed to ask. Perhaps he was doing penance for all the Christians he'd eaten. Anyway, the lion dug the hole with his paws, and between the abbot and the lion, they managed to dump Hairy Mary into the grave. And the whole thing sounds a bit hairy to me. In the 18th century, a certain bishop, Anthony Coyle of Raphoe, wrote a solemn and lengthy poem about this affair called The Conversion of Saint Mary of Egypt. He obviously had a lot of time on his hands. It was popular in Moran's time, and he memorised the words. This was his great talent, the capacity to consign to memory large tracts of verse. It became the highlight of his street performance. The crowd would call out for their favourite piece, and not knowing the title, they would simply shout, "Tuppus," or "Give us Zosimus." Soon he became synonymous with the word Zosimus, and wasn't slow to realise that it was to his advantage. Moran was quite tall and always attired in a long frieze coat with a cape, the lower parts of the skirts having the appearance of being mitered or scalloped. He wore an old, soft, greasy, brown beaver hat, corduroy trousers, and what he called his Francis Street brogues. He always carried a blackthorn stick with a heavy iron ferrule at the end, secured to his wrist by a leather thong in case he'd lose it. And his hands always resting on the top when performing. It said that he had a strong, loud, guttural voice that could be heard on the other side of the Liffey. His usual station was at Essex Bridge, where Grattan or Capel Street Bridge is today. He'd ring a bell to draw attention, and when a crowd was gathered about him, he'd commence his routine. It's important to point out that Moran wasn't just a reciter of verse. He was a polemic and would sound off about the establishment, the Protestant church, the corporation, the parliament, the police, and every topic of the day. The type of fellow we need around today. These were the times when orators such as Daniel O'Connell were among the most significant figures in society. But whereas going to see King Dan would have been like going to see the Sermon on the Mount, here you could go and see Michael Moran. You can go and see Michael Moran. He's doing his best to act mischievously tonight. Moran was never charged with anything more serious than loitering or drunkenness. Even then, when he was brought to court, he'd perform one of his poems, and if the judge happened to like it, he'd let him off. And ironically, it was these widely publicised court appearances that made him famous, and he used to publish his poem as well. Moran married twice. Now, you might well wonder why any woman would want to marry a blind beggar. We have an oil painting of what he looked like, but Moran himself was no oil painting. On the other hand, he was blind and couldn't see what he was getting. He lived with his family for most of his life at Cole Alley off Meath Street, as indeed did some of his colourful, eccentric friends, such as Stony Pockets. You'll meet all his friends in this book: Stony, Cantering Jack, Dandy Oram, Peg the Man, Fat Mary, etc. In later life he moved to Patrick Street. In March 1846, notice of a sick call was left with the clerk of the Church of St. Nicholas of Ireland, and the Reverend Nicholas O'Farrell, a young curate, duly arrived at the house number 14.5, Patrick Street, and proceeded to the top back room, and there found poor Zosimus lying on straw on the floor, and the room covered, crowded with ballad singers. He was Dick Turner's plot in Glasnevin.